Welcome, or I should say again, welcome back after our little hiatus to Sobol Says for Parshas Toldos. We will go back to our more general format of making a few stops along the way in the Parsha and asking some questions, and then coming back to focus on a few themes. So the Parsha starts out very famously and with a very obviously awkwardly structured first pasuk. V'ele Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram, Avram holid es Yitzchak. These are the offspring of Yitzchak, son of Avram. Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. So clearly there's no need to tell us that information twice. If Yitzchak is the son of Avram, then obviously Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. So what do we learn from this? Says Rashi on the first pasuk, Avram holid es Yitzchak. So it's obviously not necessary for us to for the pasuk to tell us that Avram begot Yitzchak if Yitzchak is his son. Lefisha hayu leitzonei hador omrim me'aviyet melech nisabra Sarah. She'arei kama shanim shehita im Avram v'lo nisabra himenu. Masa HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sar Kalaster Panav Shel Yitzchak Dom El Avram Ve'idu Hakol Avram Holid es Yitzchak. Very interesting. So what happened, said Rashi? Rashi said that there were leitzanim, scoffers, people that like to mock. And they were saying, you know what? Avram is not the one that sired Yitzchak. Rather, it was none other than Avimelech. When Sarah was down by Avimelech, and he, as we know, had kidnapped her at one point, that's when she became impregnated. Why? What was their thinking? Why would they think to say that? Because Avram and Sarah had been married for so many years, and they never had a child, and therefore it must mean, now that she's pregnant, she had a child, this child Yitzchak, it must mean that Avimelech sired Yitzchak. Now, let's contemplate that for a moment. Is that even slightly reasonable? Because who was the one having difficulty conceiving? Was it Avram or was it Sarah? Well, we know, of course, it was Sarah because Avram has already sired a child. He had already sired Yishmael. So clearly the barrenness was not due to Abraham, but rather was due to Sarah. Yet nonetheless, the mockers, the scoffers, were saying it must mean that she was impregnated by Avimelech because they had spent so many years together married and had not had a child. So what does Hashem do? Hashem, it says, made Yitzchak's face look identical to Abraham's. They were actually as if they were identical twins, so that it was clear to the world who his son was. That's amazing, because such is the way of leitzanim, of scoffers. Oftentimes what they say doesn't even make sense, right? It was nonsensical what they were saying, and yet that doesn't stop them. They still move forward with their ridiculous claims, so much so that what happens, it's interesting to note, notwithstanding the fact that their statements were nonsense, they forced God's hand, so to speak, right, into making Yitzchak look exactly like Avram in order to rebut their ridiculous arguments. Now that's really amazing, but it's even more of a ripple effect than you think. Because in turn, do you know what Avram does? Avram requests from Hashem that humans now go through an aging process. Because up until Avram's time, people did not age. They looked physically, their face was still youthful looking, and they didn't die from aging. You literally looked youthful your whole life, and then you just died. And by sneezing, as a matter of fact, a person would sneeze and their neshama would exit from their nose just as it entered through their nose. And as a matter of fact, that is the basis for the universal custom to say God bless you or gesundheit or something of that nature when someone sneezes. We don't say that when they cough. The reason why is because of that fact. So what happened? Abraham now said, we have a problem. Because people can't tell who's the father, who's the son. Yitzchak and I look identical. And therefore, you do start to have a kavod problem. You do start to have a problem where they could not properly honor an older person because they could not tell a physical distinction between the two. And therefore, Avram davens to Hashem that now man should go through an aging process, which begins with Avram. It actually says that overnight his beard turned white and his hair turned white. And thereafter, the course of nature was changed. Now people would age. Now, if you think about it, that's really amazing. Some idiot starts making comments and spreading rumors about Sarah and Abraham, which didn't even make sense, the rumors, because if you thought about it, it could not have possibly been that Abraham had the problem. And because of that, the course of nature and mankind is changed forever. All because some dummy said something. All because of scoffing. And that may explain why David HaMelech, in the very first pasuk of Tehillim, chooses to say, Uv'moshav leitzim lo yashav. And in the session of scorners, do not sit. Of all the advice David gives us throughout the 150 chapters of Tehillim, that's the thing that makes it into pasuk number 1. Before all else, David says, do not sit with scoffers. That is to show us how devastating and history-changing it turns out that scoffing can be. They are put in the same category as Rishayim, completely evil people. That's how heinous scoffing is. Chazal tell us that one joke, one scoff, can undo 1,000 rebukes. You could have somebody impassionately telling the people how to elevate themselves, what they're doing wrong, and then some moron cracks some joke. Everybody laughs, and the moment is gone forever. They can undo 1,000 rebukes. And therefore, we need to be very mindful of scoffers and of scoffing as well ourselves. We're all inclined to do that from time to time, and we have to be very careful about that. The Gemara also tells us that there are 4 types of people that Hashem can not live with, so to speak. There is not enough room for them and Hashem in this world, and scoffers, the Gemara says, are the worst of those 4 categories. Maybe now we can understand why that is. Their ability to negatively impact people with even nonsensical statements can have a devastating effect, including changing nature. We're going to return to this a little later to contemplate, though, why Hashem needed to even acknowledge their scoffing, when in fact it was meaningless chitter-chatter. Now we come to the birth of Yaakov and Esav, of course, page 126, Psukim 27 and 28. Over time now I'm seeing, I need my glasses even for some of the text, not just for the Rashi. So we are introduced to them. Obviously, the Torah goes forward to explain to us why they were named, what they were named, and it describes a little bit about their personality. Then in Pasuk 27, Rashi tells us, Avigadu hanarim v'yu Esav. Okay, so it says, and the lads grew up, and Esav became one who, he was Yodeh Tzayid Isha, that he knew the trapping, the hunting man, while Yaakov was very wholesome. And it says, Kol Zaman Shayu Katanim Lo Hayu Nikarim B'Maseim Vein Adam Midatek Lahem Mativam. So originally, you should know, as it is with all little kids, it wasn't necessarily clear how their natures were going to come out, right? You couldn't really tell the difference when they were little boys, but then things take a turn for the worse. Says Tzayid, Yodeh Tzayid, that he knew how to trap. So what does Rashi very famously tell us? Latzud v'laramos es aviv befiv. He knew how to trap, not trap animals, but trap and to fool his father. This is speaking of Esav, to fool his father with his mouth. Tzayid befiv, the trapping was in his mouth. V'shoalo, and he would say, Abba, he would ask, Heich masrin es hamelech v'es hateven. Father, how does one give Meiser on straw and on salt? Okay, he would ask, I don't know, do you have to give Meiser on that? And by asking that question, his father thought, wow, he is really medactic. He is a righteous guy. He's already worrying about giving Meiser on salt and straw. So he was tricking his father. That's what it's saying. And then the next pasuk as well tells us Kitzai Befiv, Kitargumu Befiv Shal Yitzchak, Midrasho, Befiv Shal Esav, okay, goes on to make the same exact point. In most of the cases, it's telling us he was speaking very righteously, as if he was a tzaddik to his father, in order to fool his father. So here we have the well-known trickery of Esav, fooling his father into thinking that he was righteous by asking him how to tithe salt or straw, knowing full well that neither of them are subject to that, just as an aside, because in order to give Meiser, it has to either be fruit of the earth and fit for human consumption. So salt is not fruit of the earth, and straw is not fit for human consumption. Therefore, they are not subject to those rules. The obvious question on this is, why was Yitzchak so easily fooled by this ruse? Okay, we're talking about Yitzchak Avinu here. Why was he so easily fooled by that ruse? And that's assuming he even was fooled. The second question is, why specifically salt and straw are used as the items with the Medrash? The Rashi is basing his comments on the Medrash. Why were those the items used which the Medrash says that Esav asked about? It's not just going to tell us little juicy tidbits without giving us information. What is it trying to tell us? Then comes the sale of the birthright. Now, the sale of the birthright occurred on the day that Abraham died. Okay, now if you'll recall, we've spoken about this before, I think in the videos, I'm not sure, I can't keep track anymore, but as a general rule, the way it works in the Torah is when a personality's relevance is no longer existent, the Torah will very often tell us that they have died. So it appears that Avram died in last week's Parsha. And that's simply because Avram is now moving out of the story. Now it's going to be Yitzchak and then Yaakov and Esav. And therefore, the Torah likes to put a neat bow on it. And so it appears that Avram died in last week's Parsha. Actually, it's right now that he died. Yaakov and Esav are 15 at the time. And it is the day that he died when this occurs, the sale of the birthright. That's why they say Yaakov was making lentil soup, because lentils are the food of mourners. He was making it for his father. The Medrash tells us that on that day, Esav did 7 terrible sins. Really terrible ones, including the big 3. Another one of them that he did was he was kofar bi'ikar. He denied the divine. Kofar bi'ikar is another way of saying that he was a heretic. He committed heresy or blasphemy. He basically indicated that he did not believe in God. Now, I read recently somewhere that it was specifically due to Avram's death that Esav chose the wrong path. He could not reconcile how such a perfectly righteous man like his grandfather Abraham could die. Right? He couldn't understand how that would happen because he seemed to him perfectly righteous. So he reasoned that if he died, it must mean that this is all worthless. This is all nonsense. It doesn't pay to be good because in the end run you're going to die anyway. And that's because, of course, that Esav only thought in terms of this world. So that's an interesting understanding. Nonetheless, he committed the big 3 plus another 4, one of which is that he was kofar bi'ikar. And I wanted to suggest, based on that may be why Esav says, when he is asked to sell the birthright, on page 126, Pasuk 32, he says, Esav says, look, I'm going to die, so what use is the birthright to me? Now, we commonly understand that he was so hungry, he was so thirsty, he was going to die, he's desperate for the food, and therefore he's willing to do anything here, take the birthright, because if I die, then what's it all worth anyway. But I want to suggest he was saying something completely differently here. He wasn't desperate for the food. He was a glutton. He just liked eating a lot of food. What he was saying is, if I'm going to die anyway, like Abraham died, then what's the whole point of this birthright thing? This birthright thing is of a spiritual nature. Spiritual nature doesn't matter to me because eventually we die. And therefore, it means nothing to me. That may very well have been what he was saying. Anyway, as we said, among his sins was that he was kofar b'ikar. He denied the divine existence of God. He committed heresy. Based on that, the Alter from Slobodka asks what we call a bambakasha. A bambakasha is a question so strong that no matter what answer you give, it's never going to be as good as the question. And this is such an incident, because he says the following. What happens here? Esav sells Yaakov the birthright. And how does he secure the deal? He says to him, Vayomer Yaakov, Hishav li kayom vayishav lo. Swear to me as this day. And he swore to him. Now, when the Torah uses the term to swear, it doesn't just mean like, oh man, I promise you, or you have my word. Swearing is a formal oath that includes the use of Hashem's real name in order to swear. Based on that, says the Alter, what was the point of that? If Esav had just denied the existence of God, then what kind of oath is that? Oh yeah, I swear by my God. You know what? Let's say I have, I don't know, a pillow that I love, Muji Baduji pillow, and I say to you, you know what? If you promise on Muji Baduji that you'll do this, then I'll believe you. And you say, yeah, sure, no problem. Why? Because you don't believe in that, so it doesn't mean anything to you. So what is the point of having him swear to God if we just said he doesn't even believe in God? Said the Alter, we do not properly understand Esav's nature. He was not always a Rasha. He had a split personality. He was like a roller coaster, frankly. One moment, he's asking about tithing salt and straw. The next moment, he's raping, killing, denying God's existence. One moment, he spurns the birthright. Later on, he's devastated when he finds out that he missed the brachos. Why would he care about that? One moment he wants to kill Yaakov, but then on the other hand, he decides to wait until his father dies before he does that out of honor to his father. He marries evil Canaanite women he is forbidden to marry, and yet then he feels guilty when he hears he shouldn't have, and marries Ishmael's daughter as well. So we see here, he is a classic split personality. He is a roller coaster. 1 minute, he's a tzaddik. The next minute, he's an absolute Rasha. Now, obviously, you know that is not the Jewish way. We can have bad days, maybe bad weeks, bad months. I don't know about years, but we have all of those. But we have to be somewhat consistent. It has to fit within a certain range. We will return to this a little later as well. Next comes Yitzchak's trip to Gerar, the Listra. It's a very odd story. Yitzchak goes there due to the famine. We see he truly tried to follow in his father's footsteps. Now we're already getting a sense of who Yitzchak was. He tried to do everything that his father had done. And this was no exception. We see he has a ruse with Rivka, just like Abraham had with Sarah, to say that she was his sister. We see that he redigs his father's wells. If you turn to page 130, Pasuk 15 and onwards, V'chol ha'be'eros asher chafru ad dei aviv me'Abraham aviv sistum blishim v'yamalum afar. So all the wells that his father Abraham had dug in those days, they had gotten filled in by the plishtim. He now comes and redigs those wells. And then it says, not only did he dig them, but he digged them even deeper. Right? It says he kept digging and they became even deeper than he had dug them before. And then, interestingly, at some point, he finds a new fresh well on his own as well. And then, Esav, right after that story, Esav marries those bad wives. On Pasuk 34, at the end of that whole story about him digging the wells, redigging the wells rather, digging them deeper, finding a new one, making peace with Avimelech on a treaty, then the Torah inserts, before it goes to the next parak, one other thing, by the way. When Esau was 40, he took the daughters of the Hittite daughters. They were very bad, and it says they were a source of spiritual rebellion to Yitzchak and Rivka. So we have a few questions on this. What is the point of this story? Especially the redigging of the wells and finding a new one. I mean, the Torah is not like we need to fill in some info, and being that there's so little information on Yitzchak, let's give you a few seemingly dry and straightforward details about his travels in Gerar. What is the point of that story? And why is that story juxtaposed to Esau's marriage to those bad women, and then followed immediately? Next pasuk begins the issue, or rather the incident, of Yitzchak's decision to bless Esau until it's foiled by Yaakov. Then comes the famous and watershed moment when Yitzchak decides to bless Esau. We will not go over the story, or all of it rather, or all of its details for lack of time, but let's just focus on a few particulars and see where they may lead us. The first is, why does Yitzchak need to eat a meal before he blesses Esau? If you look in the text, we're going to be short on time, so you'll have to take my word for it or do it on your own time. But Yitzchak requests, we know famously, that Esau go kill an animal for him and bring him a meal so he can eat before he blesses Esau. Why was that necessary? Now, it's commonly understood that Yitzchak wanted Esau to do a mitzvah so he would be more deserving of the bracha. Which leads us, of course, to our next and the most famous question, which is, how could Yitzchak have been fooled by Esau? Why would he want him to have the bracha instead of the righteous Yaakov? It's not like Yitzchak didn't know that Yaakov was a tzaddik. Okay, nowhere does it say that. Right? It could be, he may or may not have been fooled by Esau, but he certainly knew that Yaakov was an absolute tzaddik. So, being given the choice between the two, why would he want Esau to have the bracha instead of Yaakov? And even further, if Yitzchak, as we just said, felt compelled to have Esau do a mitzvah so that he would be more deserving of the bracha, then it's clear that Yitzchak may have been onto him. Right? I mean, if you were going to give it to Yaakov, he wouldn't say, go do one more mitzvah for me. He would say, wow, you learned Torah all day. You're very righteous. I'm giving you the bracha right now. Furthermore, why couldn't Yitzchak have given him a different mitzvah? Why did he need to eat before he blessed him, right? If the only reason he was eating was because he gave him a food-related mitzvah, okay, why not have him clean his room or something? Why not do something more mundane? What does he need to go out into the fields, to kill an animal, to give him a meal? Now the Gemara tells us that it's because the prophetic spirit can only rest on those in a state of joy. As we know, many of the Nevi'im, the prophets, needed to eat first, they needed to hear music, they needed to have some physical stimulation which would allow them then to reach higher spiritual levels. But for someone on Yitzchak's level, they did not need physical satiation to reach that level. Us for sure. Maybe even Nevi'im. But Yitzchak Avinu? No. And we know an easy proof of that because who was the highest spiritual level? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he goes up to receive the Torah, it tells us he spent 40 days and 40 nights without food and drink. So obviously you do not need to have that food in order to get yourself on a higher spiritual level. So why is it all of a sudden that somebody of Yitzchak's stature, one of the avos, needs to have a meal to somehow be satiated in order to give the bracha? And then our final question is, why does Yaakov have to don a costume to fool his father? Let's think about this for a moment. After all, Yitzchak was blind. Okay? If Yitzchak was blind, we don't need to worry about how we look. Last week I was in Peru, in Lima, and that is a very busy city to say the least. It has a population of 10 million. It must have 20 million cars there, and there's only room for like 2 million cars. So it is very congested. You literally cross the streets at your own peril. And here I am walking down the street with my wife, and we see a blind man. And he's just smiling, walking forward on the sidewalk with his cane, and I'm processing this situation. Now here's my problem. No habla español. So I'm going to have a problem here now because I'm seeing this blind man walking towards the crosswalk. I don't really know how to speak to him to find out if he needs me to help him cross or whatever the case may be. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, these two young ladies come over to him and they help him cross what was a very short street. Great. We're relieved we don't have to deal with it. We walk ahead. Sure enough, we come to a huge intersection now, and by the time the lights are ready to go green, the gentleman has caught up to us. Now there's no young ladies around, so now I need to figure out what to do. So I gently grabbed him by the elbow, and I said in my best gringo, no habla español, so he knew that I was just there to assist him, but that we could not communicate, and then we were able to help him cross the street. He was very sweet, very grateful, etc. I tell you that because at no point when I was approaching him did I worry how I was dressed or how I looked. I was worried about how I could speak to him, but I was not worried about how I would look. Because, as a rule of thumb, if somebody is blind, we're not going to worry about how we look. And therefore, why would Yaakov think to put on a costume? And if you look closely, it was not Rivka's idea. It was Yaakov's idea. Now, turns out he ended up guessing right. Okay? We'll admit that. But that doesn't mean that the maneuver made sense in the first place. Right? It turned out that Yitzchak asked him to come near him, and he feels him. So it was a good thing he had the costume, but it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Why does Yitzchak ask him to come near him? Because Yaakov uses God's name in his conversation, and that arouses Yitzchak's suspicion, because that's not the way Asa would normally talk, and therefore he says, come closer, my son. Let me feel you. Okay, much easier way. Just don't say God's name in your conversation. Just watch the way you speak. As I was concerned about my speech with that blind man. Just be careful how you speak, and the whole feeling thing would never happen. But no, Yaakov somehow decides I'm going to put on a costume and then seems to invite the whole episode by saying Hashem's name when he's having conversation with Yitzchak. It's almost as if Yaakov wants Yitzchak to have him approach and to feel him. Why is that? So, let's quickly list and review our questions and try to answer them. Why did Hashem need to acknowledge the scoffer's remarks about who Yitzchak's father was, such that he had to change nature to prove them wrong? 2, why was Yitzchak so easily fooled by the salt straw tithing question of Esau, assuming he was fooled? 3, why were salt and straw the specific items the Medrash tells us that Esau asked about? 4, what was the point of the Yitzchak in Gerar story, especially the emphasis on redigging Avram's wells even deeper and finding a new one on his own? 5, why is that story juxtaposed to Esau's marriage to the Canaanites and then followed by the Bracha story? 6, why does Yitzchak need to eat a meal before blessing Esau? We saw from Moshe that fasting is better. 7, how could Yitzchak be so fooled by Esau? And why would he want him to have the bracha instead of Yaakov, whom he knew for sure to be righteous? And 8, why does Yaakov have to don a costume to fool his father? Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Please come back next year. So, let's begin with the scoffers. The thing about the scoffers is, it is unlikely that they even believed themselves what they were saying, right? I mean, it was simply ludicrous. Some yokel in the corner must have been saying to himself, you know what? I noticed that big Arab guy standing next to Avram a lot. I think that's his son. I don't think Avram is the one with the problem. But nonetheless, we learn from here how careful we must be to constantly dispute the words of the scoffers, to stand up to them, regardless of how ludicrous they are. Esau's descendant, Hitler, Yamach Shmo V'Zichro, is the one that instituted such a concept when he said if you tell a big enough lie and repeat it often enough, it eventually becomes the truth. And we are seeing that now from Hitler's descendants, the Holocaust deniers. I never understood the emphasis on never forget. I grew up in a household where most of my parents' friends were Holocaust survivors. To me, that was very commonplace. I'm kind of like off of the generation. My parents were much older, and I never understood why we would always say never forget, never forget. Who could forget? I was amongst them all the time. It seemed unnecessary, but now I understand. In the beginning, we dismissed the deniers as outrageous and just downright stupid. But beware, if they do it for long enough, without our confronting them, without our fighting back, then it will eventually become the truth. We learned that lesson from none other than Hashem, who changed the entire course of nature just to disprove those scoffers, even though their claims made no sense whatsoever. We'll touch on this again a little bit more in a bit. Which now brings us to Esau. He played the role of a righteous person for so long, thereby telling a big lie over and over until it actually became believable. And perhaps that is what the Alter from Slobodka was telling us about Esau. Perhaps even Esau began to believe the hype. He was acting that way in his father's house for so long that he started to think of himself as a tzaddik. And we know that. We all go through that under certain circumstances. We act in a very proper way. We make sure we are being a tzaddik. And then we start to believe the hype ourselves. Yeah, maybe I really am a tzaddik. And that's what was happening. Sure, when he was out of the house, he was his evil self. But in front of Yitzchak, he was so used to playing the righteous role that he began to believe it himself. Now, before we get to the salt and the straw and the meal, let's look at what we may be able to extract from the description of Yitzchak's experiences in Gerar and its juxtaposition to Esav's marriage and the blessings. In order to suggest an explanation, let's see what happens right before the trip. So on the day that Esav sells the birthright, as we said, Avram had died. And as we also mentioned, even though he died at that moment, it's referred to in last week's Parsha. And if you look on page 122, Pasuk 9, there's a seemingly straightforward Pasuk, but we learn a lot from it. Vayikbaru also Yitzchak v'Yishmael banav el Ma'aras Machpelah el Sdei Ephraim and Zar Achiti Asher al Bnei Mamre. And Yitzchak and Yishmael buried their father Avram in Ma'aras Machpelah. What does Rashi tell us from that seemingly straightforward pasuk? Mikan she'asa Yishmael teshuva v'holichetz Yitzchak lefanav. Fascinating. From here, Rashi tells us, based on the Gemara, we learn from the fact that the pasuk says that Yitzchak and Yishmael buried Avram, not Yishmael and Yitzchak, even though Yishmael was older. We learn from there that in fact Yishmael did teshuvah later on in life, and therefore he gave Yitzchak the kavod of going first, because obviously he was the spiritual heir of his father, so he went first in the burial. Bearing that in mind, now perhaps we can understand what was going on. In fact, Yitzchak was not fooled at all by Esau. He understood exactly what was happening. However, Yitzchak always tried to copy and learn from everything his father did. We see that from the fact that he uses the same ruse for Rivka, by saying that she was his sister, and that Avram had used with Sarah. And he even digs the exact same wells as his father. Perhaps we can suggest Yitzchak knew who Esav was, but he refused to reject him out of guilt for being the cause of Yishmael's ouster from Avram's home. He knew that his father really wanted Yishmael to stay, right? If you recall, it's Sarah that insists that Avram throw Yishmael out. Avram wanted to keep Yishmael in the house. And as we see right before this incident, Yishmael does the shuvah. So Yitzchak reasons he should show Esav extra love, right? He saw that his father hung in there with Yishmael all those years, and now Yitzchak feels bad because it was obviously it wasn't his doing, but in some way it was because of him that Yishmael gets kicked out. So now Yitzchak says to himself, I'm going to do what my father did. I'm going to show extra love to this child in the hopes of him doing teshuvah. That may be why he redigs his father's wells even deeper, it says. He uses his father's method of loving the bad son and pours it on even more, since we know Esau was even worse than Yishmael. But Yitzchak may have missed the message. At the end of the story, it tells us he found a new well. In other words, Hashem was telling him, use a different method. Esav is not Yishmael. But he continued on his course. Emboldened by that, what does the Torah tell us that happens next? Esav marries the two worst women he could possibly marry. You know why? Because he sees, every time I act bad, Dad pours it on. He loves me more and more. He's giving me even more attention, perhaps. So he figures, I can get away with this. And Yitzchak continues with his kiruv program. And that may now explain why Yitzchak has to eat a meal, which is the opposite of how normally the great tzaddikim elevated themselves. So how can we learn from that? So first I'm going to read you just a little snippet from the paper. It's from a little while back, but I just enjoy this. Holiday ornament fight decks Hallmark. Greeting card giant Hallmark says it shouldn't have changed the lyrics to deck the halls on a new holiday ornament that brought a chorus of criticism on Twitter and the company's Facebook page. But the company says it will keep selling the ornament, a miniature version of a tacky holiday sweater that replaces the word gay and emblazons the sweater with the phrase, "Don we now our fun apparel." I'm not a Bucky in the song, but I assume the words are "down we now our gay apparel," and they instead changed it to fun. Some critics said the company was bowing to political correctness, and others accused it of homophobic bias. I love that story, and I'll tell you why. Because those are two polar opposites coming together to arrive at the same place, which is to criticize the company. Half the people said, you know, how dare you bow to political correctness? I mean, we can't even say that word anymore. The other half said, oh, you're afraid to say that word because you're homophobic. I love that. But what we can see from there is that often you can arrive at the same place from two polar opposite directions. And we see that in the Torah as well. With the Metzora, the leper who has tzara'as, it tells us that he is tahor, he is pure if either the signs are clear completely, or if he becomes completely covered with tzara'as. If his entire body is covered, then he's also tahor. Again, an example of polar opposites coming to the same place. So what happened? Yitzchak wanted to bless Esav for reasons we'll discuss momentarily, but he understood that this was not standard operating procedure, one which would normally require him to fast for many days to achieve that level. He understood he needed to come from the exact opposite approach when it comes to Esav, and therefore he did so by eating instead of fasting. Yaakov was ruchni, spirituality. Therefore, to bless him, Yitzchak could fast. But Esav was gashmias. He was all materiality. Therefore, he had to eat. So perhaps Yitzchak needed gashmias, food, to affect his bracha, whichever way he would arrive at the right place, which was the opposite. In other words, everything was opposite here in order to achieve the same result. That is actually called the Streisand effect. Yes, named after none other than Barbara Streisand. And I'll actually read you, because it's easier, I'm just going to read you the brief Wikipedia that tells us what the Streisand effect. The Streisand effect is the phenomenon whereby an attempt to hide, remove, or censor a piece of information has the unintended consequence of publicizing the information more widely, usually facilitated by the internet. It is named after American entertainer Barbara Streisand, whose 2003 attempt to suppress photographs of her residence in Malibu, California, inadvertently generated further publicity of it. Similar attempts have been made, etc. That is called the Streisand effect, which basically means you can very often come from the opposite area, or rather, you come from here and it achieves the opposite effect. We see it with Yaakov too. He is the most truthful person. Titan emes Yaakov, right? He is the personification of truth, and yet he does the opposite as well. He deceives in order to achieve the proper result. He goes the exact opposite as well. We see many opposites working here to get to the right place. And that may also explain why he dons the costume. He wanted to get caught because he knew he was right. The costume dressed as Esav was his respectful way of telling his father Esav was a sham. It was all a cover. Esav is not who he appears to be, a total ruse. So we see from Yaakov and Yitzchak the use of the opposite approach to achieve the proper goal, which brings us to Esav and the salt and straw. In fact, as we said, Yitzchak knew who Esav was. However, he also knew he was supposed to be a critical component for Yaakov's success. We don't have enough time, but the Medrash basically tells us that Yaakov and Esav were supposed to have a Yisachar and Zevulun relationship. That Yaakov was going to be the spiritual aspect, Esav was going to be the material, Esav was going to support Yaakov, and thereby they would both share in the rewards. However, they are known as Ikar and Tafel. Ikar and Tafel. Ikar means the main thing. Tafel means the side, the subordinate thing. In their relationship, Esav was supposed to be the Tafel. He was supposed to be the subordinate. Subordinate yet very valuable, right? Because without his support, Yaakov was not going to be able to be the spiritual person he was supposed to be. Therefore, the problem for Esav was he could not handle being the Tafel. He wanted to be the Ikar. The Medrash compares it to the following. It says, the straw, the chaff, and the bran once had a dispute. Each one said to the other, the field was sown because of me. Then the wheat came along and said, wait until the threshing is carried out, and we'll know for whom the field was really sown. The threshing season arrived, and the owner of the field threw the bran to the wind. Then he took the straw and threw it on the ground and burned the chaff. He took the wheat and made a huge pile, and everyone who saw it kissed it. So too the nations of the world say to each other, we are the Ikar. The world was created for us. Yisrael says to them, wait, and we'll know for whom the world was really created. Based on that medrash, I want to suggest that's why he asked about straw and salt. He asked about the straw because, as we saw from that medrash, the straw is part of the whole equation, but in the end, it's the less necessary part. The ikar is the wheat. And salt, we know, what is salt? Salt is always an accompaniment to a dish. It is never the main dish. It is always the tafel. So I want to suggest that perhaps what he was saying, Esav asks, in the hopes of raising their status of straw and salt to something that we would tithe. This is an important thing. It's a main thing. That's what Esav is asking his father. Does one tithe salt and straw? He understood he was the salt or the straw in the example. He wanted it to raise up to the level of Ikar, of the main one. He couldn't handle his relationship with Yaakov where he was going to be the tafel. And I want to suggest perhaps that is why they say that Esav was kofar be'ikar. We said before he was a kofar be'ikar, which we interpret as a heretic. Kofar be'ikar means he denies the divine, the Ikar, the creator of the world, the divine of the world, which means blasphemy. Perhaps it can also mean that he denied the ikar. He belittled the idea of an ikar and a tafel, of a main and a side, because he knew he was the tafel. And he wanted to belittle the ikar. He denied the ikar. So we see Esav too wanted to have the opposite, by the way. He wanted to be the ikar, so he tries the opposite approach, acting righteous in front of his father. But his was not merely an opposite approach. He was a roller coaster. In the end, we see he was truly conflicted based on the fact that he's beheaded at Yaakov's funeral, and his head rolls into the grave and is buried in Maras HaMachpelah, but not his body. He was unable to synthesize the two, Ruchnius and Gashmius, always trying to act as something he was not, without ever trying to actually improve himself. Thus, in the end, he goes down as the first split personality in history. Good Shabbos.